Have you seen me dice bag? The Grognard Files.
Hello, my name is Dirk the Dice, and this is the Grognard Files podcast, where we talk bobbins about tabletop RPGs from back in the day and today. I'm coming live from my den here in the heart of the northwest of England. I'm completely and utterly surrounded by my stuff. New stuff from the 90s. They said it would never happen, but here we are, the Grognard Files. We're slowly exploring a new decade, slowly. Here on my right is the great library of RPGs and my Grognard Files. There's a new stack gathering at the side of my chair, but I can still manage to do a 3-point turn on my chair with a bit of jiggling. Here on my left is the ridiculous homemade shrine to the actor Caroline Munro. I'll just give it a tap. Ah yes, the eternal champion has appeared as Carla, the witch from Captain Kronos, Vampire Hunter. As you'll discover during this podcast, our resident rules lawyer, Blythy, is currently playing her role in a series of adventures run by armchair adventurer Eddie. We're travelling through time and space, episode by episode, on the hunt for vampires. Eddie is using the Open Quest derived rules, Renaissance. It's opened our eyes to a new genre that we've not really experienced in gaming previously, urban fantasy. Unlike other episodes where we are reflective about the games we used to play and returning to them, in this one you can join us as we're on the cusp of starting to play it, learning more about it, working out what we like about it and which direction to go as we play more. Liminal was first published in 2019 on the back of a successful Kickstarter by its creator Paul Mitchener. It's the game set in a modern world about the people who are caught between the ordinary and the extraordinary. If you've listened to the previous episodes of the Grognard Files, where members of the Grog Squad have talked about their first, last and everything when it comes to gaming, Liminal appeared as the last and everything for a number of people. It has a particular appeal to UK gamers as it uses British folklore in the context of the modern United Kingdom. It also uses contributors who are familiar from the UK gaming scene: Guy Milner, Becky Anderson, Neil Gow, Richard August, Sue Savage, Paul Budowski and many others. And the artwork by Jason Beneke is fabulous and creates the mood of the setting perfectly. Join me and Blythy as we tentatively work our way through the game in the room of role-playing rambling. We hope it captures your imagination like it's caught ours. Dr. Mitch, the creator of the game, is also here, talking about his influences and some key hooks to generating your own liminal case files. We've got a bit of closing time chatter about other games that we're preparing, and I'll be back at the end with some thanks and notices. Until then, Ramblers, let's get rambling.
Speed rating.
Welcome to the room of role-playing rambling. I've got Blythy with me. Hello there, Blythy.
Hello, Dirk.
And we're back in the works kitchen again. All clear. So if you can hear some gurgling in the background, don't worry, it's just the employees.
It's not the boiler.
Why not?
The boiler's broken.
What's
it
happened
broke
to it?
yesterday. I don't know why. It just stopped working. But a man came and we need a new boiler. It's a sealed unit, he said, and it needs replacing. And it goes to show, doesn't it? Role playing and real life don't really overlap. If it was a role playing game, he said, "What's your mechanic skill or boiler maintenance skill?"
Or if you play Side World, there is actually a plumbing skill.
There is but it's none of those things. It's admin. It's an admin skill because he just orders a new one. It all his tools and everything. Said, "Oh no, you just need a new one."
State of disrepair, this kitchen.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a drawer front.
Yeah, the drawer front's missing. The boiler's broken. These conditions we have to work in.
Yeah. This is a speed rating, which means that we're going to look at a game for an intense half an hour. Concentrate on one particular game. And that game is going to be Liminal, which we've only just started playing recently, haven't we? It's a game that's been around, but not played before.
Yeah, it's been around and much talked about, hasn't it? And we've only just got around to playing it. Cutting edge podcast.
You know, obviously we're a nostalgia-based podcast. I was trying to go back and think, were there any equivalents to this kind of stuff back in the 80s, back in the day? Certainly there wasn't anything that we played.
No, and I think this is, it's an interesting question, that, isn't it? Because what would you describe it? Urban fantasy. It's urban fantasy, isn't it, Liminal? So it's set in the real world, the modern world, effectively. And yet it's the thing of there are vampires and werewolves and ghosts and the fae and all these kind of things in existence, secretly in existence in the world. So that's a common thing in quite a lot of games now, isn't it? But back in the 80s, I'm not sure. Call of Cthulhu doesn't count because that's a different kind of feel to it, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Because it's quite precise in its genre elements, isn't it? And I was then thinking, maybe in the entire genre fiction, it only emerged in the 90s. Because
I think it emerged when we stopped reading that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, we read a lot of science fiction and fantasy in the 80s, and then we moved on to other types of fiction, didn't we? Probably that urban fantasy emerged, didn't it? We'd start. So it never quite connected with us, did it?
No. I mean, Mythago Wood, I remember reading.
That's a similar,
But I think this is more about, it's more in the same vicinity as things like Vampire the Masquerade and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. This idea that the monsters walk amongst us.
Yeah.
And they're having their own conflicts.
Yeah. Worlds within worlds kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, it kind of Liminal, it calls it a hidden world, doesn't it? So it's this hidden world. And I suppose as well, in Liminal, and in a lot of these urban fantasy things, you can be a magician as well, can't you? So you can be one of these, to a point, depending on the type of game you're playing, but you can be one of these hidden people as well, can't you?
Yeah.
Which again is a bit different from Mythago Wood.
But there are games like that now, and you know, people might not realise it, but there's a theme running.
Yeah.
We've covered Monster of the Week in a previous speed rating. We've covered Vaesen.
Vaesen. However you pronounce it. Yeah, I can never remember.
And Liminal is part of that type of game.
And I must admit, I have a confession to make with you with Liminal, because up until now, I've always ignored it a bit, because I've thought, well, I've got Monster of the Week and I've got Vaesen. Why do I need another game like that?
Yeah.
So I've always sort of, although people say it's very good, I always kind of never really looked beyond the cover. I did play it a couple of years ago. Sue Savage ran a game for, I think it was the Good Friends of Jackson Elias convention. It was online. And I did enjoy it. I enjoyed it. But I've never really looked at it because I thought, well, I've got some other things. That said, having looked at it now, I do think it's very, very good. It's excellent. And it is a bit different from those games.
Yeah.
And that's, you know.
Oh, well, I remember picking it up at UK Games Expo a few years ago, and that's exactly what you said. Well, it's Monster of the Week, isn't it?
But it's not, is it?
It's not.
It's not really, because Monster of the Week is a bit pulpy, and it's very much, and it's Monster of the Week is kind of very American, I think. It's an American game, and it has an American feel to it, doesn't it? It has like a TV show feel to it. That's the whole point, isn't it? That it's like, it is more like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, whereas Liminal is very British.
Yes.
In its approach. It's a bit more subtle, I suppose, than Monster of the Week.
Yeah, and that subtlety is something that struck me running the game. And, you know, we'll perhaps talk a bit more about this later on, but when I first played it, because we did it in 2 sessions, one shot club in 2 sessions.
Yeah.
And the first time I thought, is it too subtle for me? Because I quite enjoy the lurid nature and vividness of Monster of the Week. But this is dialed down a lot. It's a lot more parochial, like you said, it's very British.
Yes.
And the way that the monsters or the fae or the hidden reveal themselves is a lot subtler.
Yeah. I would agree. And I think the other thing that put me off it a bit, and this isn't the game's fault, is the idea of getting into another setting and another world and the effort that takes. So we've played a lot of games, got a lot of games on our shelves, and sometimes I look at a game and think, so I thought it's this liminal thing. Is it like a setting with all sorts of history and bits and pieces that I'm going to have to get my head around? A bit like the experience I had with Cult. I bought Cult because I played Cult against you, Savage Round Cult, and I really enjoyed playing it. But when I got the rules, the background is just, you think, I haven't got the time for this. I have not got the time for it. But what's really good about Liminal is it's very concise and compact, isn't it?
Yes.
It tells you what you need to know to run the game, and you can get on with it. It's packaged, and this is going to sound strange, it's packaged like a game.
Yeah.
It is a game. But some games and some settings of games are not packaged like that. It's like they're written by frustrated novelists.
Yes.
Who are giving you all this guff that it repels me a bit from the game. It makes me think, I can't be bothered with this. I haven't got time for it.
Yeah. Because when you're reading this and it's representing the different factions of the Order of St. Bede or Council of Merlin, it is only giving you bits that are going to be relevant to when you do it
to the game. Yeah, exactly.
And similarly, it talks about some of the cities or locations in the UK, and it is inspiring because it pointing to some of the folklore that is from that area and how you might kind of bring that into a game.
Yeah.
Like I say, it's not getting too carried away with telling you loads and loads of stories.
No, it's not got a 50-page chapter on the history of the vampires or the history of the werewolves in Britain or the history of the Order of St. Bede or that kind of thing. It doesn't go on and on and on. It just gives you a paragraph or two. And you read the paragraph and you think, oh yeah, okay, I get that. I get what these guys are up to. I get that. I'll go with that, and I can build an adventure around it.
Yeah,
that's a really good thing, actually. More of that kind of thing in games, I think.
Yeah.
More of it.
And the other thing that it does as well with the factions is give you an NPC who is part of that faction. So you've got an idea. You already got somebody that the players can hook into or get introduced to that.
Yeah. But that thought, before I looked at the rule, that thought that it was going to be another long, rambling history of the hidden world in Britain, the factions and this and that, like some games do.
Yeah.
It put me off it. I just thought, no, I can't. I've not the headspace to deal with another setting. I've got other settings in my head. I've got the Third Imperium, Glorantha, the Weird West. I've got all this stuff in my head. I can't. There's not enough time.
But I do think that part of it is because it is a genre that probably unfamiliar to me. It's not one that I would go out of my way. I've read one of the Rivers of London books. I didn't particularly get on with it, and I don't really read that urban fantasy, urban horror stuff. Yeah, I saw a lot of it when we got back into gaming, like Dresden Files and as I said, Vampire the Masquerade. And I think part of the subtlety of it is I don't have the cliches to use or to pull out of my hat when we're playing because they're unfamiliar to me. Whereas with Monster of the Week, they are very familiar to me.
It's interesting that, isn't it? It's almost like a hidden element of gaming, isn't it? That if you are familiar with the cliches and the style of it, you can get into it. So it's like going back to something like the Weird West for Deadlands. Because you know all about Westerns, you just latch into it immediately easy to run. Whereas you're right, urban fantasy stuff is something we're not familiar with and therefore does feel you're a few steps removed from it almost. And connecting with it feels a bit more difficult maybe than other genres that you are familiar with.
The way into it for me, and the reason why I picked it up off my shelf, it being there for quite some time, is really down to Eddie. And we've been playing face to face.
Yeah.
And he's been running a Captain Kronos series of adventures. And it's vampire hunting, isn't it? It's vampire hunting.
Yeah.
You're playing Carla.
Caroline Munro.
Caroline Munro. I mean, how that works, I don't know. I mean, that's it. It's a bit weird to begin with. And
But it's a role-playing game, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not.
I know, but
I'm not Caroline Munro.
I know.
I mean, I know. You possibly wish I was. You wish you recorded this with Caroline Munro instead of me.
That's the difficulty I have with it when we're playing. I'm Captain Kronos. Grosh, the companion. He's like an alchemist, isn't he? He has special
man
powers.
vessels type character.
Yeah. It's been good because those cliches have been there, because he's transported. We started off in medieval England. Then we were in 70s England, transported to 70s.
Time-travelling vampire hunters, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then last time we were in Victorian England. He's really brought it to life and really bringing out the Hammer horror stuff of it.
Yeah, and I suppose we've engaged with it through those cliches as well, because you know the film and you know the characters through the film, and therefore you connect with it.
And that's what attracted me to getting Liminal down, because it is that world. It is that sense. It gave me a way of appreciating, as you say, the Englishness is very much part of it, isn't it? And that a bit of Gothic and a bit of that sense of hauntology, which is, that's something that's emerged over the last few years, isn't it? That idea that the countryside or urban areas, the spaces in between, may have stories to tell.
And quite an appealing concept as well. Appealing concept, and as we said earlier, different from Montserrat, different from Vase, and similar, but it is still notably different, I think. Yeah, and that's what's quite appealing about it. So we've run it. You've run it. I played it a few times. You've run it. Yeah. So I think we should turn the tables. Given that you've run it, what are the three things you like about Liminal?
Right, three things I like about it. So, first one is mechanical element, which is the use of will. So I'm going to talk about that.
Yeah. Sorry. We're not doing it right. I have to repeat, don't I?
Yeah.
So what is the first thing?
Will.
So the first thing's will.
Yes.
First thing's will.
Yeah. We'll make a good host of you, yeah? The second one is the factions.
The second one is factions.
Factions.
Yes. That's the second one, everyone. Factions.
Okay, make a note of it.
Make a note, yeah.
The next one is the crew.
The crew.
Third
one is the crew. Okay. Go on then. Will. Will.
So Will, I mean, the mechanics, if anybody's unfamiliar with the mechanics, if you've ever played Traveller, then that's Liminal, isn't it?
Yeah, it's 2d6, target number of 8, modified
by
skills and bits and pieces here, there, but you've got things like traits, haven't you, that can give you bonuses and stuff like that. But it's similar. It's not quite. That's interesting. People say it's Travel, but it's not. It has enough differences actually in it.
Yes,
to make it is different. It's just that I suppose it just has that core mechanic of 8 or more on 2d6 plus a skill modifier. But outside of that, it is quite different from Traveller, isn't it? It does have different things in it, but it's a relatively simple system.
Yeah, definitely. And then you mentioned about the traits. So traits are like the edges, aren't they? So all characters have the edges. Yeah. And there are archetypes as well, character archetypes that you can pick from. As you mentioned, you can play one of the hidden or magicians. And the way that you get your benefits is through these traits, because they are mechanical as well as descriptors. There's one element of it is will, and will is function a bit like luck, but there's a bit more to it, isn't it? You can add it to a roll after you've rolled to change the result from a failure to a success. But it's also, as we discovered when we were playing it, it is a key resource because some of the traits are activated by will. And in fact, because you're quite capable characters and competent, I mean, that was one thing that was revealed to us, wasn't it, when we were playing?
Yeah, my character was a scene of crime investigator, but she had a good melee skill, and she had a thing called fight on, which meant you could soak damage with a will. So she went after a vampire, didn't she, with a stake, and she came a bit of a cropper. The vampires hit back quite badly, but she managed to soak the damage using will, because that's one of her traits. But I remarked to you, didn't I? Mitchener quite reasonably competent and quite tough, which is good in that kind of game, because you can fight a vampire.
Yes.
with a reasonable amount of confidence.
And I think will allows you to do that.
Yeah.
But it's also a key resource. More than hit points, probably. Your will running out is going to be an important factor in the game, isn't it? It's going to affect your decisions. Going forward.
Yeah, it's just, and I suppose that's where it is different from Traveller, because even though when we play Traveller, I often use the luck mechanic, but the luck mechanic works a bit differently from will. So I suppose that's where it's fundamentally different from Traveller, isn't it? That you've got that resource that you can, and the traits are different from Traveller as well.
Yes.
You don't really have traits in Traveller, so it gives you those extra bits and pieces to work with and augment what's going on, augment roles and that kind of thing.
You can refresh the will points during play by activating your drive. I suppose we found that was a bit awkward in some places, didn't we? So some characters have a drive that is easy to...
Yeah, some characters have a drive that's easy to build in, say, well, I'm acting on my drive, therefore I get some will back, and others
quite convoluted.
Less so. Because my drive was to collect... She was obsessed with collecting vampire teeth, and so my drive was to collect vampire teeth. But I could build that in, to get some will back, to refresh my will. It was easy because we were hunting vampires, so I could just say, well, we're hunting vampires, so I'm acting on my drive all the time. Yeah. If it had been different, it might not be quite.
Yeah, some of the others were more situationally located, so they had to be in a particular position before they could do it. Otherwise, make a convoluted situation to refresh it. But I think will brings a lot to the game, and really that is, even though you got the core resolution mechanic, that is the bit that is on the table that's going up and down. And that's what you're keeping your eye on, isn't it? During it.
So the second thing is factions.
So as you said, when you first face this, and we're about to play Vampire the Masquerade, and that is built up on factions, and that looks really, really complicated.
Clans, isn't it?
Clans, yeah.
It's interesting that I looked at Liminal this week, and I looked at Vampire the Masquerade. Vampire of the Masquerade, as we call it.
Yeah.
Similar kind of things, but very different, packaged very differently as games. As I said, Liminal, quite accessible, easy, into it, read it in a night, and thought, I know what to do with this. I know how this works. I could do some stuff with this. Vampire the Masquerade was like, oh wow.
Yeah.
Flipping out. There's a lot going on here, and a lot of history I'd love to learn about vampires and clans.
The way that they're structured, as we mentioned before, they are inspiring. So they ground it in British history. But as you read it, you start to think, I can make this work. So far, we've played the quick start, which I ran. And I really I've got this idea based on Stranger Times of having this, a series of scenarios set in Manchester, because it's somewhere I'm familiar with, but also because you can introduce some of those factions and give them a bit of a local flavour. So I think it is the bedrock upon what makes Liminal. And there's some really good advice in the Games Masters section of how to construct liminal scenarios, which people are familiar from Monster of the Week, and Vaesen does the same thing, doesn't it? How to construct it, but it's very good. It's very good advice, and how to bring those factions in.
Good practical advice. And like I said earlier, the idea that it's a game to be played. So the final thing is Cruise. Not Tom. No. It's a bit shorter than that, if that's possible. It's Cruise, and we're familiar from things like Blades in the Dark, and it is a concept that's come in, hasn't it, over the last 5 years or so, of having some mechanical benefits around the actual group of PCs, giving not only them some motivation, so this is what they do. So, for example, with Stranger Times, which I heard about, having a newspaper. And the players can create that, and they can have some benefits as well. So they can choose from a pick list of what the benefits of the crew is. And it gives that, and that can develop as the adventures go along. Gives it that focus in a game where you could have a real mix of archetypes of
characters, but it gives them a thematic reason to be together.
And it's interesting, isn't it, how a lot of games do that now, because it tries to avoid that problem of, well, what the hell are we investigating this for?
Yes.
Why are we doing this? Why are we all together doing this?
Yeah.
What's the point?
What's to keep us together?
What's to keep us together? And why would we all be all these disparate people with different skills and different backgrounds all be together? Vaesen does it with the side, doesn't it? The idea that you're special and you end up living in this castle. And Liminal does similar, not quite the same as that, but it does a similar thing that it tries to construct an idea of why you're all together.
Yeah.
And why you're doing what you're doing. And to get past that problem of slightly boring problem that always crops up. Well, what are we doing this for?
Yeah.
Well, it's a game. Get on with it.
Yeah. So I think that crew works really well. So they're the strong points.
And what do you not like about it? We have to do that, don't we?
Yeah.
What's the one thing you don't like?
Right. So the one thing that I don't like about it, well, it has the benefit of having a very simple system.
Yeah.
Which we've mentioned, the roll over 8 on 2d6. But we did find a couple of occasions, didn't we, where we needed some spot rules to deal with certain situations. Like, for example, if you've got a telescopic stake and you want to put it through a vampire's heart, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, there was that. That was true, that you'd think there'd be a spot rule for staking a vampire in a fight, because really that's what you're trying to do, isn't it? There's no point. You don't really just got to stab one with a piece of wood. You want to get it through the heart. So how do you deal with it? It does have a kind of advantage, disadvantage rule, I think, where you get +2 for advantage and -2 for disadvantage. So, and it gives a few examples of things. It doesn't give staking through the heart, but it gives a few examples, like if you're on higher ground and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I suppose you could have
used those modifiers.
You could say, well, if it's cold shot, I'm going to give you -2 and I'm going to give them +2 on the opposed roll thing.
Yeah.
You could do that, but it doesn't, you're right, it doesn't specify. It's always a strange thing, isn't it, with games that do that, because you get games that go to one extreme where they specify everything.
Yeah.
Everything's laid down to the point where you think, well, I can't go with this because it's just too many rules. But then the other extreme, where it's kind of rules light, you do get those situations where you think, what do I do with this? And I suppose more problematic, it's not so bad coming up with a rule or an interpretation of the rules on the hoof if it's a one-off situation. I suppose it's more problematic where it's something that might happen a lot. So staking a vampire through the heart in a game where you're a vampire hunter will happen a lot, won't it?
Yeah.
That will happen a lot. So you've got to be careful about how you house rule it, because if you house rule it wrong, we've all done this, haven't we? You house rule it in the first game, and then by the third or fourth game, you start thinking, I wish I hadn't house ruled it like that because it's too easy or too difficult. So I know what you mean. Yeah. You can do it. The game allows you to do all sorts of things because it is quite simple, and those modifiers can.
I just think that it's sometimes when you're doing those adjudications of pluses and minuses, they're a bit clumsy in a way. And you sometimes want a little bit more, don't you? I wondered whether introducing the idea of boon and bane dice from Traveller, that idea of just having an extra advantage dice or disadvantage dice. So you take the lowest result or the highest result, depending on what it was. Yeah. Might work more effectively.
But they're always a bit tricky, those things. Even the boon and bane in Traveller, if you decide to house rule it as well, if you're doing that, I'll always give you a boon, or I'll always give you a bane if you do that. And then they do that a lot. Yeah. You're then tied into it, aren't you? Where you go, I haven't made that decision now because I've given them a boon for doing whatever it is, this particular thing. And now they do that all the time and they get a boon and it's too easy for them.
Yeah.
So can be the problem with house ruling things, making the wrong judgment early on.
Before we sign off, what are now you've read it, you played it a couple of times.
Yeah.
We always have a monster off, don't we? So what do you like to face in this? If I'm devising a scenario, what are the monsters?
Well, vampires are always good, aren't they, to fight? I'm definitely a vampire hunter. This is the problem with Vampire the Masquerade, We're going to be playing that soon, aren't we? We're going to be playing vampires. I don't know. Yeah. I'm more of a vampire hunter than a vampire, I think vampires are great, aren't they?
Yeah.
Classic monster. They won, didn't they win our
Monster off on
the ultimate monster off?
Yeah.
Episodes and episodes ago. I'm sure the vampire came top. I'm sure it did. It wasn't top, it was near the top.
I quite like the idea of introducing werewolves, but having, particularly in Manchester, of having some alternatives. There's actually a supplement that deals with werewolves, because I've not had enough werewolves in my game.
Ghosts as well.
Ghosts
are always undervalued a bit, aren't they? I don't know, in role-playing games, you always think a ghost, you think, oh yeah, all right. Because I know Vaesen has a few scenarios with ghosts in, and I always overlook them a bit and think, it's just a ghost though, isn't it? It's not like a monster.
Yeah.
But whenever you watch movies or read books that have ghosts, you think, it's quite good ghosts, aren't they?
Yeah.
You know, and Liminal does have ghosts in, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So maybe ghosts rather than vampires. Maybe a ghost is the thing to include.
It's been quite good discovering this game, because it is a new game to us, isn't it?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I'm looking forward to playing more of it.
And it's been quite a good experience discovering it, going from. It's quite a heartening experience, because I've gone from thinking, I don't think it's for me. I think it's a bit like other games, and I'm not sure I can be bothered, or I've got the headspace to learn a whole new setting. And yet, playing it and looking at it and reading it, all those things are not true.
Yeah.
It is different from other games. It's accessible. And I do want to play it, and I do want to run it as well.
Yeah.
So that is kind of heartening that you can still find a game that excites you, even though we've got loads of games, we've played loads of games, and we've talked about loads of games.
And I think, I mentioned that Eddie's game gave me a way into it and the vampire hunting. But as well, I watched recently, because I didn't see it when it came out. Again, it was in the 90s. Yeah. It was that Ultraviolet, which is really the same thing, the P division in vampire hunters in the British police. So it really helped me get into it. I'm looking forward to getting into some of the subtleties of it.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. It is a kind of gateway, because it's so well together and well explained. It feels like a kind of gateway into that sort of stuff.
Right, we're going to have a brew before we go, because we have to use a kettle.
You have to use a kettle, boiler's knackered.
A sealed unit.
Sealed unit. Make an admin role. There you go. Hey, more.
Open box.
Welcome to the Zoom of Role-Playing Rambling. This time I'm joined by the raconteur, virtual pub landlord, maths guru, uke player and games designer, and RPG polymath, Dr. Paul Mitchener. Hello there, Dr. Mitch.
Hello there, Dirk. Lovely to be here. So being on the pod Grognard Files, I feel like I've finally made it.
It's great to have you on. And I'm hoping that the Zoom of Role-Playing Rambling is a bit like a doctor's consulting room today, because I'm consulting you on RPG matters.
I mean, my rates are modest £20 an hour, so, it's not too bad.
And my questions are not about maths. They're about your game, Liminal, because I've started playing the game. I just want your help in getting into it. So I've had a first session, and I just could do with your help in just getting into it, just understanding where it's come from. So if people are listening who don't know the game, what's the pitch?
It's modern day fantasy set in the UK. So it's a UK where magicians are real, where werewolves, vampires, fairies, the whole shebang, ghosts, that sort of thing. It's all real. It's hidden. Most people either don't know about it or ignore it. You're caught up. You do know about it and you can't ignore it.
It's as simple as that, isn't it?
People know these enough bits and pieces of folklore, and if you like, popular culture folklore, to just grab onto it and grab onto these ideas, and things form. There's a village, there's people regularly making sacrifices to the fairies. They've stopped, and now the fairies want their revenge. You get that immediate pitch you could set in any village. Or, vampires lurking around nightclubs, preying on the population. They've grabbed someone who maybe they managed to get away, and now you've been alerted to it. Again, easy pitches, easy things to grab hold onto.
Yeah, and I've recently re-listened to a podcast that we did, episode 2, where we talked about Call of Cthulhu, and that ability, when scenarios are close to home, they give an extra edge to them.
You can do an edge. You can even play sort of set it in the recent past and play with recent history. So, for example, the thing you did with Knights, Black Agents and the Miners' Strike, that's inspired because everyone can latch onto that and get sort of has views and thinks about it. Or maybe at least anyone in a northern British town thinks about it, right? Of our age. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that type of thing, setting it in somewhere familiar, is really handy. It makes it, whether it's local to you or not. I mean, the other thing is a lot of the playing of this, I did a lot of playing when it was first out. And of course, that was over the COVID period. And it meant we could get a group of people together, role playing, going down the pub.
So where did it come from? Where did the idea come from for Liminal?
Initially, I think it's a case of I wanted something, it changed from this. I was thinking I wanted something UK centred in this sort of, if you like, monster hunting genre. And then it became something a bit more gentle than that, in a sense. You know, we're not necessarily hunting monsters. I suppose the other thing was, again, lots of system ideas I was dabbling with, because I was thinking what would be a nice, simple system to power that with a sort of broad range of things, but still broad and not universal. So that was the system engine. And the final push came when, at work, I was on strike for 3 weeks, meaning I wasn't getting paid for 3 weeks. And that gave me the kick to finish it off and put it on Kickstarter. So, yeah, basically I did it for the money.
It's interesting you said that about tone and the subtlety to it, because that was what surprised me. I must admit that we didn't go to the game because we were already playing Monster of the Week. And we thought, well, isn't it similar to that? It's several shades, several tones lighter, isn't it?
I mean, Monster of the Week is a great game. You know, I certainly ran that before I was even thinking of Liminal. But yeah, I think it's almost deliberately something different there, going for this sort of different range of fantasy, sort of urban fantasy, really. I mean, I wanted to do a bit of sort of world building, because that's actually one of the big appeals of writing something. You can be self-indulgent a bit with world building. So it's a case of thinking of various factions. One example of the factions is some of them come from logical thought. You're thinking, okay, there's magicians. Let's have a bunch of very academic wizards, and think, well, no, right, let's make them all posh boys. And that's basically where the Council of Merlin came from. Very much a boys' network until very, very recently. You know, with this monetary requirement of, I can't remember what it was, did I say £500,000 or something to join? It was something ridiculous. And so that led to that. I mean, there was obviously going to be some police involvement, hushing things up, putting things in. So that led to P Division. And then thinking about bits of folklore to do with the Fae and bits of invention. So the folklore, you're thinking, okay, the Winter King, this whole business, what's going on over in the wilds of Britain, especially in the north and in Scotland. And that got twisted to become the Winter King, which is one of the fairy factions. And it's that sort of thing. Again, the vampires. So the vampires, they're nests of vampires. They prey on people. There's an overriding organisation. I thought, well, what if vampires were just that bit out of date and not with it? What do they think the way is to gain total control? Well, clearly, you know, the UK is a monarchy. What they need is control over the royal family, and that led to the sodality of the crown. And they're never going to realise that sort of ambition. And even if they do, it won't really do what they think it does. Having a lot of fun with thinking of things like that.
Yeah, and that's British as well. That sense of class runs through the factions, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that once I realised I was doing that, I deliberately lent into it.
One of my favourite lines in P Division, because this is the off-the-books unit of the police. They're funded from the stationary budgets, aren't they? So they're kind of creaming off the stationary budgets of various police forces.
Yes, basically, yeah. I think that was told, I think at work, because I'm an academic, we were told at one stage, you're using too much chalk. Which sort of, like, that sparked that idea.
Also, with P Division, it reminded me of a short running, well, I think it only ran for one season, but Ultraviolet, which was in
Ultraviolet is definitely inspirational viewing there. I mean, obviously it's a different setup. It's specifically, you know, vampires, a special unit fighting the vampires. But it was a great series. I really did like it.
Yeah, I think it only ran for 6 episodes, didn't it? But
I think so, yeah. It was Channel 4, wasn't it, I think? Was it Channel 4?
Yeah, and it had Jack Davenport in it and a young Idris Elba, didn't it?
Yes, that's right, yeah. Yes, it was always Jack Davenport who was the star, wasn't he? But I think you're right. Young Idris Elba is very noticeable.
Yes, and this whole area of urban horror, urban fantasy, is that something that exploded in the 90s, or are there things that predate that?
I think you're right that things exploded in the 1990s with TV series such as, I'm thinking Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I'm thinking, okay, you mentioned Ultraviolet. That was late 90s, I think, wasn't it, as well? Another British one would be Neverwhere, another single sort of 6-episode thing. So it was a Neil Gaiman thing, but I think he got it from talking to Lenny Henry. And I think he was trying to make the whole thing a big sort of almost an analogy of homelessness and make it fantastic, but not also bring home that, not to glamorize it.
Right, yeah, of course, because I've played the Quick Start and the homeless. You identify they're the
they absolutely sharp in Liminal, don't they? Yeah, the hidden are almost Neverwhere is a very clear inspiration there, I think. And coming down to books, so I'd say probably some of the earliest inspirations for this, and again in novels, this exploded in the sort of 90s and later on. But probably some of the earliest novels of the current recent splurge of them, as it were. One would be the Hellblazer comics with John Constantine?
No, I don't know those.
No, that's sort of, there was, of course, a TV series as well of that on Amazon. Heavy smoking, scouser, ill-advised magician. And that goes back to 1985. It's very much rooted in its times. There's a lot of commentary on, say, Thatcherism, for example. The politics are really in your face there. And it's all the better for it, I think, for me. Definitely an artifact from the 1980s. Other early novels, Emma Bull's War for the Oaks, which is, I can't remember, I think that's like late 1980s. That's sort of the American idea of urban sort of fantasy. There's a city, there's hidden factions of fae going on. And it's very much a British folkloric type of fairy. I think my problem with that is even in my 30s, I think it was when I first read that, it had a character called Willie Silver, who I had trouble taking seriously. I reverted back to being a teenager. Other early books would be Moonheart, which is Charles de Lint. So he did huge numbers of sort of urban fantasy novels. He's a Canadian author. But that was his first, and that's 1984. One that's more pure horror, involving being abducted by fairies, is one called Fairy Tale by Raymond Feist. So those are the 1980s novels. More modern novels, I could give you big lists and lists of series and things like that if you want. I could also say consult the bibliography of Liminal if you wanted to do that as well.
For some reason, it's a massive gap in my reading and watching. For some reason, I've steered away from them. And maybe that's the reason why I haven't been drawn to Liminal, but now that I'm in it, I'm kind of intrigued by it and want to discover more.
There's lots of people, there's lots of grognards who seem to have got into it, I think, because of the British element of it. One thing I certainly do, first of all, so I gave you the sort of easy pitches, but one thing to do is take literally anywhere and look at the local history, look at the local folklore. So every village in the country virtually has a church that's nearly 1,000 years old, which is kind of incredible when you stop and think about it. So there is stuff going on there. There's weird landscape features. There's landscape features where it's like, oh, yes, look at that dish in the landscape. Oh, yes, that was scooped out by a giant. Oh, was it? Okay, that's the folktale. Things like that to just play around with that idea. And then I think things come quite naturally.
I think it's inspired to use the phrase liminal as well.
Liminal spaces element is something that's definitely been interesting to me for a while, and not just so much airports as liminal space, but saying people at places, I don't know, little borders between countries and things like that. And yeah, extending that to that is really fun. And of course, the adventures in Liminal do go on really between the borders between the supernatural and the normal worlds.
Locally, I have a canal that I walk down every night, and I always get inspiration from that because of the people who live on there, the wildlife I see there. And you just think this is just something that's between two very industrial towns of the past. But this is a little sanctuary, but it also has a history of its own that is waiting to be revealed, or it's concealing, really, and the actual building of it as well. So you're right, everything has its own story, hasn't it?
It's really fun playing with that and revealing it and using it. Whether it's, like I say, canals, industrial landscapes, or things that were industrial and now sort of post-industrial. Possibly there's a process of gentrification. Possibly there's still abandoned buildings. That's interesting from that point of view. Anything that's squeezed out there, things squeezed out, bits of countryside that are left by being squeezed out by industry. Yeah, that stuff's great. It's idea fodder. Interesting pubs, right? Pubs are good.
You give really good advice, just picking up on that theme. It's one of the strong points of the rulebook is the advice you give on building cases.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think that's a good idea because you can start off with that advice. You can build things with that fairly rigid structure I've set out in the book. And then you can start branching out from that once you're comfortable with it.
And there's a range of supplementary materials. If somebody was starting out, which are the books that you would go for? Because I've got Werewolves of Britain, which I'm enjoying reading. And you have to say as well that the artwork is superb.
I was very lucky working with Jason Benker, the artist, for this, and having that sort of unified artist throughout the whole thing. You know, you're right, he's brilliant, and he gets it.
And that very much sets the tone of it, isn't it? And this Werewolves of Britain, again, there's loads of ideas of hooks. It just develops the faction, really, doesn't it? And where they may emerge, and gives you some ideas of where it's quite a slim book, but it's packed with stuff. Are there any others that I should be going towards?
The newest one that's come out is Case Notes, which is the collection of individual scenarios with some ideas of linking them together, you know, by me and others. I mean, you could also pick them up in individual PDFs for, I think, £1 or £2 each, if there's any particular ones you take your fancy, or you can get the collected book. Pax Londinium is if you're interested in setting things around London, is an obvious one. So the next thing coming out for Liminal is Fairies and Folklore. Jason is doing the art for that at the moment. After that, it's Nova Castria, basically set around Newcastle and around County Durham. And that's nice, right? Why have everything in London?
Is that going to have lots of bridges in it and trolls? That's what.
Of course, there's going to be lots of bridges and trolls.
Before we leave, I want to talk about mechanics, because that is something that you enjoy, isn't it? And we've talked a lot about the setting. What interests you about game design is the mechanics, isn't it? How the rules make these things work.
I mean, I like mechanics being tied in to the setting, or at least tied in to what you're doing in the setting. That seems sort of quite important to me. I also want them to be simple enough that people can grasp them, but also simple enough they're not doing anything that annoys me, right? That's my bar for a game. I'll read it and think, oh, this is a cool setting. You're doing cool stuff here. Do the mechanics do anything which annoy me? I do like to have at least some small way of manipulating the dice a little bit after the roll to smooth out luck. So that's essentially where it was going from. So I did initially have playing with much more complicated ideas. But again, the 2d6 roll and then spending will to boost the results just seems to work with there. And I'll go where my maths came in is basically, well, what's the target numbers you want to have this running at the sort of degree of success that seems appropriate.
The will becomes quite a important resource. It certainly did in the quick start that I ran.
When there's a lot of punishing things going on or just bad luck, being careful with will and almost choosing to fail things is pretty important. It certainly gets important with the players, especially when there's combat going on.
Many of the traits are triggered by will, aren't they? So people want to hold that back, don't they?
Yeah, so anything that's sort of magical, you're spending will on essentially a lot of the time. Like you say, it becomes sort of the resource to manage, really, if you're doing that.
The importance of the crew as well, that has mechanical elements to it as well.
I wanted the crew to be important in the game. So again, I had the idea of, well, some choices you're making as a group to almost bring the players together as the group when you're making those choices. I mean, the other thing is, of course, there's different types of crew, different things you're doing. Are you a sort of supernatural investigation business? Or are you some sort of, if you like, sort of secret division of the police? Those are different things and they're going to lead to different scenarios. But the other thing I'll say with the crew is that I wanted that element of, I suppose, found family to be important in the game. Because the people in the game are their liminals. Ordinary society knowing all this other stuff's out there, that makes it hard to cope. But also, if they're maintaining humanity, they're not going to go, fully into the supernatural factions. So it's a case of trying to maintain a foot in both camps and basically finding other people like them to work with.
Yeah, and it gives reasons for the different archetypes to be together, doesn't it? And because there's quite a range of them, isn't there? Yeah.
Yeah, because why would a magician be working with a werewolf? You need that reasoning there.
Yeah. So it's a fantastic game, and I'm looking forward to getting more into it and developing a campaign. I've got these ideas set in and around Manchester that I'm developing, so I'm looking forward to getting into that. So thank you for guiding me through some of the areas of it. Thank you very much, Paul.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on. Like I said, I feel like I've made it now. I've sort of life ambition checked off.
I'll get me caught.
Welcome back. We're now in the Zoom of role-playing rambling. Hello there, Blythy. You're back, and we're heading towards the door.
Yes, hello, Dirk. I'm back, but I'm putting my coat on.
We're heading towards the door. We can't quite bring this podcast to an end, so we're heading towards the door. We've got some closing time chatter, some any other business. So what's yours? What's occupying your brain at the moment?
What's occupying my brain is the Dungeon Crawl Classics Dying Earth box set, which I acquired a few weeks ago. I didn't order it from America because I can't remortgage my house for the postage.
Dying Earth, and obviously I was very tempted to this just because of the Dying Earth thing.
Yes.
And we've been playing a bit of Dungeon Crawl Classics. So the first question is, how does it do Dying Earth?
It's interesting to compare it to the DCC Lankmar box set, because the Lankmar one doesn't change the game very much, I would say. It has a few new rules in about healing without clerics and things like that. But the Dying Earth one changes it quite a bit more in that it introduces new character classes, which the Lankmar one doesn't really do. The Lankmar one just uses your conventional character classes. So it has magicians in, who are a bit like wizards, obviously, but it operates slightly differently. They reconfigure the magic system a bit. It is like the Vancian fire and forget thing, but it has sort of extra rules about learning magic and how you learn stuff and how things work. And it has wayfarers, who are kind of like travellers, a bit like rogues, travellers. And it has witches as well. Witches has magic for witches, which is again interesting, like curses and stuff like that. And most interesting of all, and the most fun of all, it has vat things. So there's a character class, vat thing. So you can play a vat thing that's been grown in a vat by a magician, which of course you remember from the books. So that's quite good fun. So it does kind of it doesn't alter the game as such. It's not like a different game, obviously, but it reconfigures it a bit, if you see what I mean, for the Dying Earth. A bit more than the Lankmar one. It does quite a few changes, a bit more to get your head round, I think. And it has a nice rule of a grudge, things called grudge tokens. So when you fail a roll badly, if you get a 1, you get a grudge token because of your level of embarrassment in front of your fellow adventurers. And the idea that you kind of embarrassed and they laugh at you slightly, sort of thing. Very Vancian, you're kind of humiliated. So you get a grudge token, which you can play against another player later on to make them fail a roll.
That's good.
They can make
That's very
like the idea you made a fool of yourself, so you harbour a grudge against your fellow adventurers, and later on you can make one of them fail a roll, which is a very Vancian thing, isn't it? Kind of, the pride of adventurers who are very slightly pompous, like they are in the Dying Earth. There is that thing, isn't there, that everyone has a very high opinion of themselves,
particularly Kugel, who's like the main character of Eyes of the Old World and Kugel's Saga. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so as rules like that. So it's quite, it's very, very appealing, actually, very good. And I think as well, what's interesting, and again, I said this about the Lankmar thing, you realise when you read Dying Earth setting how influential it is in role-playing, the beginnings of role-playing. I mean, people often talk about it, don't they, that D&D, Vancian magic in D&D and that kind of thing, which is obviously the obvious thing. But there is, in the Dying Earth setting, you realise how some of the monsters from D&D, the weird monsters in D&D, are very Vancian. The Visp, for example, is very reminiscent of Umberhulks in D&D. You can see kind of parallels. Some of these monsters that are in D&D, early D&D, so like Displacer Beasts, for example, although they're not in the Dying Earth, they wouldn't be out of place in the Diner. It kind of reminds you, although you know it, it reminds you that, people bang on about Tolkien. Not a very D&D, it's not very Tolkien-esque at all. It's very Vancian, not in the magic system, but in the whole shtick.
It's good that you say that, because it's a bit of a disconnect for me, because when you say Dungeon Crawl Classics, you think of dungeon crawling. And dungeon crawling is just the opposite to me to Vancian stories. Vancian stories are about picaresque encounters with strange people in unusual circumstances, rather than going down deep into the world, finding things. So does it deal with that? What are the adventures like?
Well, I'm going to be running one of the adventures for MorpCon in Manchester in a few weeks. I'm doing the funnel. Don't switch off. I've said the word funnel. Don't fall asleep. The book, The Pilgrims of the Black Obelisk, and it's interesting what you say about encounters, because that is an adventure where you play 0 level pilgrims on your way to this city to worship, involve yourself in certain rituals for this long forgotten god. And it is a journey with encounters, and the encounters are exactly what you just said, these kind of picaresque characters, unusual characters and situations that you find yourself in on a journey. And that is very Vancian. It's not a dungeon. It's not a crawl in a dungeon. It's not that at all. It's a journey with various encounters that are peculiar, unusual and eccentric. It brings out that Vancian flavour.
What I found, to my surprise, is that when the Grog Squad, so some of the Grog Squad, discovered Jack Vance through listening to the podcast, because in previous episodes we've covered Leoness, and we do tend to pepper our conversations with references to Vance. There's quite a few people who, to use the expression, bounced hard off it. So it'd be interesting to see whether it actually gets any traction.
Bounced hard off it? What's that mean? Bounced hard off it? Is that a hard agree?
It's like a version of hard agree. Yeah, it's like they found some of it quite repellent and out of step with modern sensibilities, which I can see, because it's got its basis in the cruelty of fairy tales, hasn't it? And some of those fairy tale archetypes are about old power structures.
Yeah, there is, and this, the adventures, or at least the one they've read, they do. I don't want to give too much away because someone may end up playing. I mean, this may be released before I've run the Pilgrims of the Black Obelisk, but there are definitely those kind of cruel, fairy tale type things going on in it that are quite cruel, which feel relaxed about in a 0 level game where it's a funnel where you're playing 4 characters. So as a gaming master, you think, I'm going to be old Scoutian on you. Doesn't matter. But it definitely does have that sort of cruel twist. I wouldn't say, I don't think there's anything in it that upsets modern sensibilities. I can see that the books might, because they're of the time, that kind of thing. The game doesn't do that. I think things like that are sort of eradicated or pushed aside. But there is that sense of, cruelty and trickery and those kind of things are there, I think. Yeah.
Well, I'm wrestling with a similar thing, because I've got off the shelf Twilight 2000, which I got as a Kickstarter. So I didn't get it from Leisure Games. I went all in. I went in big style. I got it in a biscuit tin, the top level thing, and instantly regretted it as soon as it arrived, because I think I've mentioned before that I looked at it and my eyes just glided off it. I found it very unappealing, and it's just sat there. So in order to persuade myself to do it, I've actually put it down. I've put in the calendar for Owlbear and the Wizard Staff convention game that I'm going to run. So I know that I've got to get my head around it, and I've started looking at it. And it is that thing of balancing the sensibility, because that's the bit that I was struggling with, because it goes for a sort of realism that I can't quite tolerate, and it's particularly when it comes to like military realism. And that was what I didn't like about the old game, and it's slightly different with the newer game, because it is more of a narrative type, and they've got a bit more crunch in it for using the Year Zero engine, but it's still grounded in authenticity and trying to put you in situations that are like a military squad. And I found it difficult, but I found a way into it over the last few weeks because I watched Black Hawk Down, and I thought, of course, it can just be like a war movie.
Yeah, you could do that. That's the way to do it, isn't it, I suppose? Yeah, it's not a simulation of real war, which might be slightly unpalatable to people, but yeah, do it like a war movie. The fine line of war movie, a good war movie treads between being a war movie and giving some other kind of insight into real war situations. Black Hawk Down probably does reasonably well, doesn't it? It's based on a real situation, isn't it? But equally, when you watch it, you think, well, here's a movie.
And it's hyper real, isn't it? It kind of, the intensity of it is dramatic. It's all about the drama, it's all about the characters and about the situations that they're in, not necessarily a reflection on the terrible thing of war and people having to be put in these terrible positions, which may be dramatically interesting, but I'm not sure as I want it in a game.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, isn't it, with, most role-playing games involve a degree of violence and horror and that kind of thing, but there's that fine line, isn't there, between it being like a book, like a movie, and it feeling sort of that it's trying to emulate reality in some way. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, a bit close to reality, isn't it? It's that kind of thing I always think when people are frightened or horrified by horror movies, I always think, why? The news is the worst horror film you can watch, isn't it? I suppose it's like that in role-playing games. The nearer you get to something that feels real, the trickier it becomes. No, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think it's tricky to run.
So I've decided to add another layer to it as well. So I'm a big fan of the Morrow Project, which is a game from, I think we played the first edition, didn't we, in the late 70s. And that premise is a science fiction premise that, Morrow put these people into cryogenic storage with the idea of repopulating the world and preserving civilization after a nuclear bomb. And what that brings is there's like a separation because they were expecting to come a few years after the bomb, but in actual fact, because of reasons, it's 150 years after the bomb. So things have progressed somewhat. It hasn't got quite the same. There's like a level, a distance that I need really to just enjoy it rather than it being too terrifying.
It makes it slightly more sci-fi, I suppose, doesn't it?
Fictionalizes it, puts a fictional gloss on it.
Yes, yeah. It's not being set in. Yeah, it's not being set kind of now in Europe in the near future.
I say that's the biggest problem I'm trying to deal with, but really the biggest problem I'm trying to deal with is resisting the urge of buying some model soldiers and actually laying it out on the table
with a tank, with a toy tank,
with an actual tank. Yeah,
I expect you to do that. I want to say when I'm at Albert, I want to glance over at your table and see toy soldiers and a tank. All right? And if you don't, I'll be disappointed. I'll be disappointed in you. There's that's your opportunity, isn't it, to do that? Enhance your game considerably. Not that it needs enhancing. It might do.
Yeah. I'm used to disappointing you, Blythy. Anyway, that's another podcast, isn't it?
That's another topic altogether.
Yeah. All right, then. I'll see you soon.
Goodbye.
There isn't another bit.
Thanks to Paul for spending some time to discuss Liminal. It's always fun spending time with him. Many people keep telling me that their setting is versatile and the fun is about pushing and exploring your own lines of inquiry. If you want to witness this process in action, then I urge you to listen to Dave Patterson's Frankenstein's RPG podcast. In Series 3, it has taken a departure from its usual format, and instead of constructing a game from the component parts of others, it's working with collaborators to generate a campaign. The panellists are using Liminal to create a campaign that touches upon all the places along the A1, the Great North Road in England. originally created by Romans and cutting across a multitude of legends and lore. Over recent days, I've been doing a bit of planning for the book club. This is the Grognard Files monthly meeting where we discuss the different topic every month. You can find details on the site, thegrognardfiles.com. Over the coming months, we have a discussion about Diceman, the book about the origins of Games Workshop, another session about zines, a special meeting with Jeff Richard joining us in October to discuss the King of Sartar, and the new cult books that have come out for RuneQuest. The discussions are always light, yet insightful. You can choose your own level of participation, so I hope that you'll come along to one. It's also the time of year when the tickets for Grogmeet in Manchester in November go on sale. They'll be released to patrons first before going on general sale. Again, see the grognardfiles.com site for details. Thanks to all the patrons who continue to make this podcast possible. Due to the tips that they throw into the hat each month, they cover the costs and fund projects and generally encourage us to keep going even when the kettle is broken. There's been a number of comings and goings, but thanks to all the patrons past and present, as it makes a big difference to us. If you want to support the Grog Pod, then please pass it on and help us to find new people to speak to. Reviews are fantastic too, as they help those machines learn stuff about us, and who knows, maybe some chatbot will incorporate these bobbins into an essay about the meaning of life. Thank you to the following new patrons: Ronald Easterday, Michael Spenley, Stephen Lee, Benjamin Klein, Confusing Trousers, and Barry Ryan. For those who are joining at the sofa so good level, I like to roll on a random table and give them a virtual gift as a way of thanks. This time I'm turning to Liminal and I'm going to go to the traits, which are not normally available to PCs, but for one day only, the following hidden can have these special effects. That's a 5 to Joseph Heckle, who can now appear human. Jerry Knuckle. Oh, he's got a fairy tongue. Or in Bolton, a furry tongue, which is something completely different. Robbie Wilson. He's a poltergeist. And Wheat Squid. Oh, invisible. Thank you to everyone. That's the first part of our liminal adventure. Next time we'll be talking to the author C.K. MacDonald about his The Stranger Times series of novels set in paranormal Manchester for a bit of local liminal inspiration. And Blythy and I will be putting our wig on at the pub after watching 70s classic The Children of Stones. Until then, adios amigos.